Hey dudettes and dudles, my name is AiraSora, and today I am really excited to share with you the very first chapter of my Hollina fanfic, Entre nous. Entre nous is French and means between us. It's usually a sentence that is said when you are in the room with someone and you have to tell them a secret, and it's supposed to stay just between the two of you, hence the name Entre nous. It is my very first Hollina fanfic. I'm really excited to have finally finished the first chapter, and I asked some time ago if people were interested in a potential podfic. This way I can practice speaking English a little bit more, because even though I write and read a lot in English, I actually don't talk a lot of English, not as much as I would prefer anyway. And doing a podfic would mean I could practice the language a little bit more. I also had people who asked me if I was going to do a podfic because they wanted to know the story, but their reading abilities were limited either due to English not being their first language, or maybe they were dyslexic or something like that. So to me this was a win-win situation, because this way I can share the story with more people and I also get to practice the language a little bit more. As this is the first chapter of the story, I'm going to give a few disclaimers and trigger warnings. First of all, this story is supposed to take place in the vague time period of between the 1600 to the 1800 or something like that. I have on purpose not decided on an actual time period for this story. This is first of all because my history knowledge simply isn't good enough for everything to be historically accurate. So if you're really into history, please respect that this is a piece of fanfiction and not an attempt at teaching anyone facts about a certain time period. Second of all, I didn't want to feel restricted in terms of references to music, certain word use, etc. I will of course not throw computers or anything highly modern into the story, but there will most likely be several mentions of things that didn't belong in the same era, and the story will include several Disney and non-Disney characters from different countries and eras as well, so if that bothers you, this isn't the story for you. And now to a few trigger warnings. Due to the story's vague time period, homophobia, racism, and sexual violence will be at the very least vaguely implied or even major themes. In the events of a particularly triggering scene, I will always stop reading and then I will cut off the music and I'll say, this next part is a particularly triggering scene. Please look at the timestamp in the video to skip it. And I will always ensure to the best of my abilities to write such a scene in a way so you don't actually have to read it in order to understand what happened. You can skip that part if you're uncomfortable with it without being afraid that you won't be able to follow the rest of the story. I will do my best to ensure that it's not a necessary part in order for you to understand what's going on. And then there's the final thing I want to talk about, that is the Easter eggs. In all of these chapters, there will be several quotes, references, etc. throughout the story. If you can find every single one, either by writing to me after reading every chapter or sending them all to me at the same time once the story is over, I will find some sort of reward for you. So without further ado, let's get into the chapter. Entre nous by AiraSora, Chapter 1, The Scent of Begonias. Are you at all nervous, Lady Angelina? A young lady's maid inquired. It was a particularly exciting evening that awaited her lady. Her debut in the social circles, a day long awaited in the estate. My dear May, I am positively thrilled, the little lady beamed. I feel like I could leap into the sky. May couldn't help the warm laugh escaping her lips, allowing her hands to rest on her lady's shoulders. You have been anticipating this day for many years, my lady. I hope it's everything you've dreamed of. Angelina let her hand reach back to hold her lady's maid. I wish I could bring you with me. May smiled kindly. You have done so much for my family and for myself. Asking for anything more would be greedy. I agree with the Countess Dowager. It would be unwise to bring a maid of my complexion to a debutante ball. Angelina's rosy lips tightened in frustration. She turned around to face her lady's maid, determination in her eyes. Someday, when we are wiser, life will be fairer. And it will be thanks to kind and courageous people like you, Lady Angelina. Like us, Angelina corrected. Strength in numbers, Miss Liu. We all need each other if we wish to see the world be kinder someday. No one could do such a thing alone. The two women held each other's gaze for a moment, titles and class forgotten and their earnest friendship being all that mattered. The moment was only interrupted by the sound of a knock on the door into Angelina's chambers. She smiled one last time to her lady's maid before allowing her to help her out of the chair. "Is everything as should be?" Angelina inquired, twirling around in her dress. "You look marvelous, my lady," May answered as she went to the door. "I'm sure the Countess Dowager will agree." At the mention of her title, Barbara Benson stepped into the room, the door just opened by May. She nodded appreciatively to the girl before her gaze landed on her daughter. She held a hand to her heart, her weakened body leaning on her cane in awe. "My dear sweet Tulip," she spoke, causing her only child to blush in a rose-like color. "You are every bit the lady your father and I raised you to be." "Mother, you're making me blush!" "Now we can't have that. May have done such a wonderful job with your appearance. We wouldn't want your shyness to break through and make your rosy cheeks look like more of that of a lobster." Angelina spied on her reflection in the vanity mirror. "I love this dress, Mother, especially the colors. You have always been fond of blue and green colors. A cyan and teal dress seemed appropriate for your debut, and I see May has done well in taming your auburn locks as well." Her insistence of growing it until she finds a husband surely shows determination, May quipped, silently envying her lady's enthusiasm. She herself was nowhere closer to finding a husband than when she was Angelina's age a few years ago. "One day you will slip in your own hair, and when that day comes, I will laugh," Barbara warned good-heartedly. "In that case, I better put Prudence's lessons to good use so no one will have to be exposed to your cackle," Angelina bemused, playing with her hair. May's skills with her locks was one of the main reasons she became Angelina's beloved lady's maid to begin with. That, and she felt like she could be inappropriately honest with her. That was priceless in this world. Angelina allowed herself to reminisce the first time she met May, both of them mere children. She, her father and mother were on a trip to China. For what purpose, Angelina no longer remembered. She only remembered being utterly bored and having run off to find something to occupy her boisterous self with. That was when she met May on the street and had asked her if she wanted to play with her. Not soon after, May had asked if she could play with Angelina's already then long hair. Nowhere near the length it had now, but nevertheless longer than most girls her age. When Barbara and David Benson had noticed their daughter's absence, they excused themselves and scurried to the street to find a treasure greater than any money their potential business partners could have offered them. It didn't matter to them that others would surely have asked servants to find the child. It was when May had just finished her task at hand that Mr. and Mrs. Benson found them. Angelina, oblivious to her parents' anguish, showed off her new hairdo. The strawberry blonde hair had been tied into a thick braid, sectioned in 3 and tied around her hair securely. Barbara had been the first to notice the intricate design, especially from someone so young, and had also been the first to suggest they brought May with them back home. May had been the youngest of 3 daughters, and it hadn't been easy to convince her family to let her work for them so far away from her own home. After discussions and promises of letters, visits, and pay to both May and her family, the Liu family agreed. May's family was well taken care of, receiving a very pretty penny every month for allowing their daughter to work at Tulip Chateau, along with quarterly visits and a nicer hire than anyone else in May's position. This, along with Angelina every now and then convincing her parents to let May travel to China outside the agreed time periods, helped Angelina's guilt for keeping May away from her family. May knew, though, that if she should ever wish, she would be free to travel back home for good. Though Angelina would be lying if she said she wasn't so selfish to hope that would never happen. By the time Angelina had pulled herself out of her web of thoughts, she and her mother had been left alone in her chamber. "Have you mastered the language of the fan yet, my dear?" Angelina gestured for her mother to wait and skipped to her vanity drawer. She pulled out her fan and rested it on her right cheek. The Countess Dowager smiled. "No?" Angelina's face paled. "No, I mean, yes! Fiddlesticks, have I gotten it wrong? I'm teasing you, child. Right cheek for yes, left cheek for no. You were correct." Angelina let out an undignified sigh. "You mustn't make me worry so. The art of the fan still eludes me," she insisted as she gazed upon its elaborate design with a smile. She wasn't quite sure how a mere flick of her wrist could gain her suitors, but she had to admit she found it oddly amusing. "I still fear insulting a potential suitor." "Well, let's go over it one more time then before we leave." Barbara sat down on her chair, readying herself to instruct her offspring. Show me how you would tell a gentleman that you are interested in his company. Angelina thought about it for a short moment before decisively opening the fan and carrying it in the left hand. Barbara raised an eyebrow. Come and talk to me? Rather forceful of you, dear. All is fair in love and war, Angelina quipped, closing the fan again. And this is indeed love and war, Barbara commented. Remember, dear, be friendly with the other debutantes, but don't forget they are your rivals as well. Don't let your non-confrontational heart take a good match away from you. Hence the bold choice, Mother. I don't intend to let someone take my heart's desire away from me. Oh? And how would you portray such a message? Angelina immediately threw the fan into her right hand, carrying it boldly. Barbara couldn't help her boisterous laugh. You have indeed grown up to become quite the little rebel. Take it from me, dear. Telling a rival that they are too willing may not be the insult you think it to be. Very well, Angelina responded by allowing the fan to rest behind her head instead. Better? Indeed, more subtle, Barbara agreed and stood up, walking towards her daughter. Unfortunately, telling someone not to forget you is usually targeted at a suitor and not a rival. Would the message shine through, though? Quite possibly, she agreed once more, but took the open fan out of her youngster's hand. She lifted it in place before dropping it downwards. But this might benefit you more. Angelina raised a curious eyebrow. Asking to be friends? Keep your friends close and your enemies closer, Tulip. Barbara winked and gave the fan back to her daughter. Remember to also enjoy this evening. How could I not? You and Father have prepared me for this evening my whole life. I only wish he was here to enjoy it as well. Your father would be so proud of you, just as I am. Barbara gushed and caressed Angelina's cheek. The girl leaned into her mother's touch, smiling brightly at her. You will make the loveliest of brides, little Lena. Quite a bit before the biggest hour would strike at the newest hour, Angelina arrived at the debutante ball, her mother with her in the carriage. The coachman held both women out and escorted them towards the entrance. A small line had gathered in front of them, debutantes with their chaperones, preparing themselves for the Lord Chamberlain to introduce them to the people awaiting in the ballroom. Angelina fidgeted with her fan, nerves starting to succumb her. She was about to voice her worries to her mother, hoping to receive some comforting words, when the hiss of a voice caught her ears. She looked at her mother, who seemed to have noticed the sound as well, and they both discreetly looked behind them. "Oh, Lady Tremaine!" Barbara exclaimed in a voice that shocked Angelina. Never had she heard her mother's voice in that particular pitch. It warned her that perhaps Lady Tremaine was not a welcome face. The woman in question, grey-haired and wearing a dark red gown, looked up towards them, away from the girl next to her. She showed a sinister smile. "Countess Dowager, I see you are here with a debutante of your own." "Yes, my daughter just turned 16 a few weeks ago." Angelina's attention left the elderly women and she opted for scouting her rival, Lady Tremaine's daughter. She was taller than Angelina, though most people were, had deep red hair, was wearing a magenta gown, and looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. She noticed Angelina looking at her and looked back sheepishly. Angelina's good-hearted nature surfaced and she smiled brightly at her, curtsying. The girl smiled in relief and curtsied back. "Anastasia!" Lady Tremaine suddenly hissed and a smile disappeared from the girl. "Straighten your back!" Anastasia Tremaine's back hardened as well as her face. "My apologies, Mother." Lady Tremaine sighed, gently caressing her forehead. "Swear to me that if any gentleman is foolish enough to find your gorgeousness endearing, that you hold on to him like a wild stallion." "Yes, Mother." "As strict as ever, Lady Tremaine," Barbara stated between thin lips. Angelina made a mental note to come find Anastasia when she had time. She hoped she could befriend and perhaps even help the poor girl. A suitable match would give her the freedom from her mother's clutches. Not long after, Angelina was readying herself for her introduction. Soon, all eyes would be on her. It would be her first impression to any potential suitor, and she was determined to make it a good one. On cue, she and her mother stepped forward, the Lord Chamberlain waiting for the former debutante to walk down 10 steps before introducing them. "The Countess Dowager Barbara Benson of Tulip Chateau and her daughter, Lady Angelina Benson." A polite applause emitted from the guests as Barbara led Angelina down the stairs. She had counted the steps earlier, so she could keep her gaze up as she walked down. When she reached the final step, she smiled in relief and let her mother lead her wherever she pleased. She hoped the love of her life had noticed her already. When she had the chance, she turned around to watch her hopefully new ally walk down as well, but it was not with as much grace as herself. Anastasia may not have been elegant, but it wasn't until the final step she legitimately stumbled. Her mother tried supporting her, but a gentleman came in from her other side and grabbed her. He apologized with a dashing smile, insisting he was to blame and to please forgive him. After a not-so-subtle nudge from her mother, Anastasia lifted her fan. She told him she would forgive him if he promised her the first dance, and then fluttered her eyes behind the opened fan. Oh dear, Angelina cringed, but despite the clumsy delivery, the gentleman promised Anastasia a dance, and hopefully that was satisfying enough for Lady Tremaine. It seemed to sate her for a moment, but she did make sure Anastasia understood how foolish it was to tell a gentleman, just after her introduction at a debutante ball, that she was not yet engaged. Poor unfortunate soul, Angelina's heart skipped a beat at the sudden unfamiliar voice. She turned her head to see a woman next to her, Lady Jessica Radcliffe, married to Lord Roger Radcliffe, a well-known pianoforte player in town, and gentry, of course, thanks to his marriage to Jessica. They often played big parts in entertaining gatherings like these, Roger playing the pianoforte, with Jessica adoring the crowd with her sophisticated voice. She had a way to keep people's eyes on her, especially men. They could hardly be blamed with that slender, statuesque figure of hers, a bosom 3 times the size of a small waist and long legs, full lips, forest green eyes, and smooth red hair. From what Angelina could recollect, despite Jessica's seemingly standoffish personality, she was relatively harmless. Even though her husband made for a far more entertaining conversation than she did, Jessica proved to be very intelligent and charming in her own right. Angelina's mother was quick to grasp the opportunity. Lady Jessica, what a joy it is to see you on this fine evening. I don't believe I have introduced you to my daughter, Lady Angelina Benson. Angelina curtsied politely. It's a pleasure to meet you. Likewise, little tulip, Jessica answered so casually that Angelina almost thought she heard her wrong. A hint of a smirk showed at the corner of Jessica's deep red lips. Your mother has spoken very fondly of you. I can see she didn't do your beauty justice, though. Angelina felt her cheeks heating up and smiled brightly. She brought out her fan, unfolded it, and dropped it to her waist. With a curt smile, Jessica brought out her own fan, keeping it closed and resting it against her right cheek. Her response brought out another bright smile from Angelina. So, my little lady, have you had the chance to scout the potential suitors yet? Angelina looked around at all the unfamiliar faces, suddenly feeling overwhelmed with the options. I have only arrived mere minutes ago. Was I supposed to? All you're supposed to is mingle and present yourself, Jessica assured. But if you do happen to see someone you find charming, do come find me. Perhaps you're fortunate and I can put in a good word for you. Thank you, I appreciate your offer very much, Angelina replied, almost out of breath, and started looking around. She wasn't about to let Jessica's offer swindle away just to dawdle. She would at the very least see if anyone caught her eye. In the midst of dazzling gentlemen and ladies, Angelina's eyes did indeed land on a handsome, roguish young man, slender with fairly tanned skin and dark brown hair tied into a brief rat tail. That was all she could see from afar. As subtly as she could, she captured Jessica's attention and nodded towards him. Jessica smiled. Ah yes, young James Pleiades Hawkins. I believe you would. Angelina's snicker interrupted. Pleiades? Well, that's a funny name. She giggled and Jessica gave her a confused but amused look. Angelina gasped, cursing her honest childlike reaction. I mean, it's perfect. Fortunately for you, I believe James shares your opinion of his middle name. Shall I introduce you to? Would you? Angelina asked excitedly and accepted Jessica's arm when she offered it. Would you like to meet Mother? Just be your usual charming self, my darling, Barbara reminded her and retreated to a group of her peers, mothers of debutantes just like herself. What can you tell me about James Hawkins? Angelina whispered as they made their way towards him. I have very little time to inform you about him, so you must tell me what you wish to know the most. Angelina thought about it hard, but time wasn't on her side. What does he do? He has always been quite the seafarer, and is currently a sea cadet. He has many tales about his adventures far away from land. So, he is rarely home then? Angelina asked, her face falling at the thought of wandering around aimlessly at home, waiting for her husband to return. Jessica wasn't blind to the girl's decreasing mood, so she tightened her hold on her arm conspiringly. But perhaps having a wife to return home to would turn him into more of a landlubber, she whispered with a smirk. Angelina's face twisted into a giant grin, and the spring in her step returned, just in time for James Hawkins to notice them approaching. He excused himself from an older woman he was talking to, a pretty woman with brown locks framing her slowly aging face. He nodded familiarly to Jessica Radcliffe and then laid his eyes on Angelina. Her bright blue eyes graced his features, her face blushing under the gaze of his equally royal blue eyes. He was as handsome up close as he was from afar. He noticed two peculiar characteristics, one being a scar on his cheek and the other being the gold earring on his left ear. Angelina suppressed her urge to immediately ask about both and tried to introduce herself. James Hawkins had the same idea though, and they wound up talking over each other, stumbling over the words, and no closer to being remotely familiarized. They both, in perfect sync, looked to Jessica for help, who shook her head good-heartedly. "Jim, allow me to introduce you to Lady Angelina Benson of Tulip Chateau," the red-headed beauty announced, her hand gesturing towards Angelina, who curtsied on cue. "Lady Angelina, meet James Players Hawkins." Jim's face visibly cringed at the sound of his dreaded middle name, but bowed with a smile to his new acquaintance once he had composed himself. "It's a pleasure to meet you, my lady." "Likewise," the rose-cheeked lady responded, fiddling with her fan nervously, wondering if she should use it to convey her desire to be his acquaintance. She decided against it just before Jim interrupted her thoughts. "Are you enjoying yourself so far?" "Oh, I am positively overwhelmed with how lovely everything is," Angelina cheered. "The music, the gowns, the people, the—" Jessica gently nudged her glove-clad elbow against Angelina's side. "Pardon my enthusiasm," she started in embarrassment. "I like your enthusiasm," Jim soothed with a crooked smile. Just then, the Lord Chamberlain's voice boomed through the room as the music started. "Let the dance begin!" Angelina could hardly contain her excitement at the thought of her very first dance, preferably with the young man in front of her. She smiled brightly at him, and he looked nervously back, but extended his hand nevertheless. "I may not be the most elegant partner, my lady, but I would love to have your first dance." "With pleasure. I'll leave you to it," Jessica said, a curt smile gracing her features as she walked away from the designated dance area while the youths approached it. Angelina didn't have room in her heart to be nervous, neither should she have been. Her mother and lady-in-waiting, Prudence Van Ruden, had trained her down to the very bone of her body in everything high-class society had to offer. Every tiny thing from something as necessary as how to dance to questionably useful skills such as botany. Needless to say, Angelina was a true lady in every fiber of her being and acted as such, never missing a single step. But there was one thing her mother, Prudence, nor anyone else could possibly have prepared her for. And that something caught her eyes just as a man reached for her hand. It was at first just a passing silhouette in the corner of her eye, a mere short-term distraction. Foolishly, Angelina allowed herself to flick her eyes towards it, a certain surprising scent occupying her senses. Begonias. Her bright royal blue eyes turned towards the owner of the fragrance. It was a woman, dancing, just as Angelina was, and yet she seemed not of this world. Her hair was as light as the afternoon sun, tied up in a chignon, but with two loose locks that had rebelliously escaped to frame her fair-skinned face. She was wearing a layered gold and pale yellow dress, which showed off her shoulders, and with bows along with a matching gold bead necklace and pearls in her hair. And as if destiny had interfered, in the middle of her chest was a big zircon gemstone, matching the much smaller gem the necklace was holding as well as the pearls in her hair, and the dress Angelina was wearing. But all the gold and gemstones in the world could only withdraw in shame as the woman's natural beauty outshone theirs tenfold. Plump, rosy lips, relaxed without a care in the world, pale yet bold blue eyes slightly hiding under grayish-purple powdered eyelids. She was simply a vision, through and through, her movement as bold as the wind taking hold of autumn leaves on a cold evening, but as smooth as a pond meeting familiar land. Her very presence besought every ounce of people's attention, should they first have given it to her. And therefore, Angelina did something she had never done before. She tripped. Angelina stumbled over her dress, her mind imagining the inevitable, tumbling face first on the marble floor, her teeth just as broken as her pride. but the hand holding hers firmed its grip and she managed to balance herself just in time for the stumble not to develop into a pitfall. She composed herself long enough to smile at her savior, the lord she had just touched hands with. He gave her a firm nod back, his face never changing its expression away from one of concentration. She would have to remember to thank him properly later. The lord sent her back to her dance partner, who gave her a look she couldn't decipher. Jim seemed unsure what to say or whether to say anything at all. Angelina had briefly hoped he hadn't noticed her clumsy display, but that hope went out the window when he gave her a sympathetic smile. For the remainder of the dance, Angelina held tears at bay, cursing for making a fool of herself on this important evening and just next to a potential suitor. After the curtsies and bows, Angelina noticed her mother approaching them, most likely to have a private word with her about the incident. She smiled as brightly as she could at James Hawkins and put her fans behind her head in a secret message. With a smile, he bowed and told her he could never forget her before he left. She wondered if his reply had been disguised mockery, but she pushed the thought away to greet her mother. "Tulip?" Barbara whispered in urgency as she led her daughter away from the dance area. "What happened? Not even once, even as a child, have you ever missed a step. Do you feel well?" "I'm so ashamed, Mother," Angelina answered, biting her lower lip to keep the still stubborn tears away. It was like the world stopped for a moment, and then it abruptly started again. I wasn't ready for it. Was it that obvious? Barbara seemed unsure how to answer. Spare her daughter the truth or trust her strength to compose herself? She nodded and almost regretted it when her daughter clenched her eyes together, her lips quivering. Her mother tightened her hold on her as she led her outside on the balcony. She gave her child a few minutes to give in to her feelings. Angelina took a few deep breaths, wiped away a single tear, and then faced her mother. Barbara smiled at her while she used her hand to even out the powdered cheek. What happened? Angelina sighed as the memory washed over her. There was this woman. Someone tripped you? Oh, no, not at all. The fault was mine alone. I looked at her for a few seconds too long, and then... Angelina visibly cringed, ending her sentence before she could embarrass herself further. What woman? Lady Angelina! A voice suddenly called, and a slightly familiar woman sprinted towards them, holding the huge magenta gown in her hands. I saw what happened during the dance. Don't worry, I trip all the time. I think I did it maybe 7 times just during this dance, and no one even noticed you, I'm sure. Angelina smiled in surprise. Anastasia's personality seemed to be very different now that her mother wasn't present. Thank you, Lady Anastasia. I appreciate you taking the time to comfort me, she spoke, holding out her hands for Anastasia to take. Anastasia reached out for them, her smile almost as bright as Angelina's, until her mother's voice reached them. Anastasia! A lady doesn't run, and most certainly not just after a dance with a potential suitor. Have you forgotten what you promised me earlier? No, Mother, of course not. I'm sorry, Anastasia answered, letting go of Angelina's hands to face her fuming mother. I just thought I could offer Lady Angelina some comfort since the glare Lady Tremaine sent her youngest daughter sent chills down their company's spines. Never had Angelina seen such a cruel pair of eyes. She truly felt frightened by the woman. Lady Tremaine didn't need to do anything else before Anastasia walked back into the room, holding her gown elegantly in her hands but with slightly shivering shoulders. Barbara patted Angelina's back, beckoning her to follow the poor girl and her mother. Understanding fully, Angelina followed them. Pardon me, Lady Tremaine, but my mother has told me in great detail how brilliant your scouting skills are. If it wouldn't be too much trouble, could I perhaps ask for a piece of your advice? I would be very appreciative. Lady Tremaine didn't look at all surprised at Angelina's compliment. Very well, child. You can listen while I talk to my daughter as well. There's someone here tonight I think you should get some information about. But don't think I'll continue to be so kind to offer you my advice again. I wouldn't dare, Lady Tremaine, Angelina said, curtsying politely as she quickened her stride to walk beside Anastasia. Now, darlings, Lady Tremaine spoke, gaining the youth's attention. Do you see that blonde woman over there wearing the ivory dress with gold jewelry and sea blue gems? Anastasia and Angelina both looked in the direction Lady Tremaine was subtly pointing, and a woman was indeed standing there in a crowd of men around her, young and old, all trying to get her attention while she was drinking a glass of whiskey. A rather surprising sight on its own to see a woman drinking such hard liquor, but even more so because she looked as if she had been born with that glass in her hand. Angelina felt her heart skip a beat when she realized this was the same woman she had noticed before. She was less overwhelming from afar, but breathtaking nonetheless. Whatever information Lady Tremaine had about her, Angelina found herself desperate to know. A bit hard to miss, isn't she? Anastasia joked. But who is she, Mother? Do we know her? Oh, you must have heard of her indeed. Lady Holly Corso of Frost River State, daughter of Nancy Wood? Anastasia shouted, but was promptly silenced by the hand her mother slapped over her mouth. A lady doesn't shout, she hissed before she straightened the sleeves on her arm. After a last warning glare, she looked towards Lady Holly Corso once more. As you can see, men are easily infatuated by her, flocking around her like flies around Anastasia. Both redheads visibly cringed. Sorry, Mother, the taller of them whispered. Lady Tremaine sighed in contempt, but reversed her attention back to Lady Holly. As you may know, she is the natural daughter of Joseph Corso and his mistress Nancy Wood. After his wife rather conveniently passed away, he presented Nancy Wood as his new wife with a child having already been birthed. I cannot believe Lord Joseph let them take his name. That was too much exposition at once. Angelina felt her eyes concentrate with all their might on the elegant woman so far away from her. It felt like a cruel joke. How could someone so utterly perfect have such a sad reason to be alive? And how could she stand there, swarmed by men, behaving like she didn't? Behaving like she wasn't the result of the most scandalous affair of the century. She laughed like God with an unbecoming carefree nature. The glass in her hand was practically an extension of her arm, with the way she moved about, but with the glass remaining perfectly safe in her naked palm. In other words, my darlings, Lady Tremaine whispered secretively, if you find yourselves fancying a gentleman who seems smitten with Lady Holly, don't feel discouraged. Any true nobleman will in time lose interest in a harlot. The last word forced Angelina out of her web of thoughts. It seemed like her new companion, Anastasia, seemed taken aback by the word as well. Lady Tremaine gestured at her daughter in a dismissive manner before leaving the girls where they were standing. A pair of fairly apologetic pale green eyes sought out Angelina's confused ones. She tilted her head to the side. What's a harlot? Anastasia's jaw dropped for a split moment before she promptly put it back in its proper place, sparing a quick glance towards her mother before leaning closer to Angelina. Lifting her hand, hiding her mouth, she whispered in her ear. A salacious woman, Anastasia explained, leaning back, seemingly happy with her explanation, but her recipient seemed just as confused as before. She lifted her fan and hid her mouth behind it this time. A lady who's a bit too fond of the company of men? Not wanting to seem daft in front of her new friend, Angelina pretended to understand this time. She made a mental note to ask her mother to clarify once they were back at Tulip Chateau. Somehow, despite not understanding, Angelina felt her heart tighten. Salacious harlot didn't sound like a name you'd want to be called. It surprisingly reminded her of the time she had met with George Claude Frollo after church service. The man always struck her with a sense of righteous fear and reverence. He had made a note on that particular Sunday to warn her of the sinners of the world. Angelina hardly remembered much of it, having been too uncomfortable at the proximity of the judge, but she did remember one particular sentence that struck her. When speaking of the devil, she hears you. And suddenly, Angelina felt as vulnerable as a baby deer, freshly birthed in a patch of snow, as her eyes were fixed by a pair of pale blue gems across the ballroom. The debutante felt her body freeze in delirium, her heartbeat quicken and her head spinning. She felt cold and hot all at the same time, a lump growing in her throat. The way this woman held her stare felt so agonizingly insistent, like an omen. It didn't even cross her innocent mind to tear her eyes away from her. She felt so far away even though they were in the same room. She wanted to see her up close, see the details in her brilliant eyes. She wanted to hear her voice in a laugh, in a yell, in a sneer. She wanted to taste her name on her tongue, speaking in casual pleasantries or wonder life's big mysteries. She wanted to touch her golden hair, perhaps style it like her own if she would allow it. And she wanted to smell the begonias. I would appreciate it if you would give me some pointers if you think I'm speaking too slow or too fast, or if I need to do something. I don't know. I mean, it's limited how much I can change the way I speak. I'm not used to this yet. I'm hoping that once I've reached the final chapter, you can hear clear difference in the way I read the first chapter and the last chapter. I hope I'm gonna develop a lot, but I would appreciate it if any of you would take the time to write a comment and tell me, oh, you need to maybe slow down, or maybe you need to speak a little faster, or I don't know, something like that. I would love some pointers. I definitely feel rusty in my writing. It's been a long time since I wrote a fanfic or wrote anything at all, actually, but for the first fanfic to return to after such a long time to be a Hollina one seems appropriate. I've been meaning to write this story for a long time. It's one of the Hollina fanfics where I have a much clearer and specific idea of how to go about it in the plot. It's not gonna be one of the longest Hollina fanfics I'll ever write, but it's not gonna be one of the shortest either. So I think it has, maybe, I hope it's going to have a good length for people not to feel like it was over before it was even started, but not so long that people are gonna be bored, hopefully. So yeah, please tell me what you thought. Of course, please be gentle with me. It's my first time doing this. I'm not too used at speaking English. It doesn't come that naturally to me. So yeah, it's limited how much I can do right here and now, but I would love to hear if there's something you guys thought I was doing really well, or something you feel like I could do better at, or just also tell me what you thought of the story. And tell me if you read the fanfic before you heard me reading it to you, or if you were waiting for me to do this so you didn't have to read it, or I don't know, anything you can think of telling me, I would appreciate, because this is my first time doing something like this and I'm really nervous about it. So I just hope I did an okay job and I didn't make anyone's ears bleed. I promise to practice a little bit more. Maybe I should start doing like some voice exercises before I read them. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next chapter. See ya!